The sky opens before the boy, not as heaven, but as a wound. Grey light bleeds across the hills of Paeonia, and somewhere above the tree-line, a single crow wheels through the frozen dawn, crying once, a sound too sharp for morning. Beneath it, the land lies raw and breathless. Burnt smoke twists upward from a dead village, curling into the pale sky like a prayer gone unanswered. Blackened thatch crackles in the breeze. The frost has not yet left the grass. A boy no older than 10 stands at the edge of the ash. Sheepskin clings to his narrow shoulders, stained with soot and stiff from sleep. His feet are bare. One toe bleeds against a stone. But he does not flinch. His eyes fix on the ruin before him, not in horror, but in stillness, as if trying to memorize the pattern of loss. He holds a wooden lion carved from birch, dangling on a thread of sinew worn nearly through. Its face is smooth from years of handling, ears chipped away. He doesn't remember where he got it. He only knows it has always been his. The lion swings softly in the morning breeze, ticking against his fingers like a heartbeat. He does not cry. He does not call out. He simply waits. This boy, whose name we are only beginning to remember, is Perdiccas. He does not yet know that this cold clearing, with its charred bones and silence, will one day be his genesis. Before empire, before legacy, before the cruel burden of history, there were only tribes and smoke and memory. The early Macedonians knew no thrones, only the rhythm of rivers and the sharp taste of mountain wind. They lived in wooden strongholds half swallowed by the hills, where horses were worshipped and blood feuds outlived kings. Their language was older than cities, softer than Greek, rough as flint. They buried their dead in mounds ringed with stones, the bodies laid with iron blades and simple cups, believing the afterlife to be a long march that required tools, not gold. These were not people shaped for marble. They were shaped for mud and blade and survival. The boy walks. Past scorched grain silos, past a scorched loom still heavy with half-woven flax. Crows scatter from a body curled near a doorway, the hand still gripping a blackened spindle. He doesn't look away. He simply moves forward, step by step. There is no one left to stop him. In those years, Macedonia was a wound between empires. Too wild for the Greeks, too fractured to conquer its neighbors. To the Illyrians, they were prey. To the Athenians, they were a joke. They were mocked for their speech, their clothes, their customs, mountain folk pretending at kingship. But the Macedonians had something that could not be measured in city walls or silver drachma. They had memory. And hunger. The boy walks until his legs tremble. He finds an untouched cart tipped in a ditch, its wheel cracked. Inside, a cloak. He wraps it around his shoulders. It smells of goats and smoke, but he holds it like a banner. By nightfall, he reaches the edge of a shepherd's camp. No one speaks when he appears. A woman hands him a bowl of barley and lentils. Another places a blanket at his feet. No questions. No names. Just breath and heat and time. These are the bonds of a scattered people, not forged in love, but in survival. And from this silence, something begins. Years pass, but the cold never leaves his bones. The boy becomes a youth, hard-mouthed and narrow-eyed. He learns the spear before he learns to write. He learns the weight of debt, how a man may give you food today only to take your daughter tomorrow. He sees how oaths are made not with words, but with blood smeared across stone. He remembers the lion. Even when the thread snaps and the carving is lost in the river, he remembers it, the weight of something fierce hanging from his neck, the way it made him feel larger than the mountain wind. In a world where kingship is a costume, Perdiccas learns to wear silence like armor. And yet the kingdom, if it can even be called that, begins to look toward him. He does not claim the throne. It claims him. An elder speaks the old rites at dusk. A white ram is slaughtered beside the hearth. The blade used is the same one that slit his father's throat during a border raid. This, he is told, is tradition. This is kingship. Perdiccas does not speak during the ceremony. He only nods, and accepts the iron ring that marks him as ruler. There is no crown. No cheers. Only the low moan of the mountain wind, and the sound of a boy becoming something else. He does not forget the village. He does not forget the crows. He begins to build something from the inside out, not palaces, not temples, but order. He rides to the scattered tribes and speaks not of glory, but of protection. He shows them the scars on his hands, the brands on his arm from the time he was taken as a hostage by the Illyrians. He says nothing of revenge. Only of unity. And in time, they begin to come. Horsemen from the highlands. Miners from the valley. A priestess from the far river clans who brings with her a scroll inked in the old dialect, a list of burial sites lost to time. He memorizes them. This is not yet empire. It is something seed-like. Something breathing. But others notice. To the south, Athens watches. To the west, Illyria grows restless. One winter, smoke rises again from the borderlands. Raiders strike a loyal village. Perdiccas rides at night with only a dozen men, none older than 20. When they reach the village, it is already burning. But this time, the boy is no longer a witness. He does not hesitate. He finds the raiders. Cuts them down with the precision of hunger. A blade across the throat. A javelin through the ribs. One man begs for his life in a dialect Perdiccas recognizes, a dialect once spoken by the man who fed him lentils long ago. He flinches. Just once. Then finishes the work. The people begin to speak of him not as boy or man, but as flame. Something alive and unstoppable. Mothers whisper his name over newborns. Elders carve his crest, a lion, reborn, into stone. But Perdiccas does not bask. He returns to his hut. Sharpens his weapons. Listens. Always listens. And in the quiet moments before sleep, he dreams not of cities or temples, but of a small wooden lion, worn smooth by fire and grief. The kingdom grows. Slowly. Bloodily. But it grows. He does not declare war. He absorbs threats. Marries daughters to rivals. Offers grain to starving clans. He learns to use hunger as diplomacy, silence as pressure. By the time he dies, quietly, during a spring hunt beneath a blossoming ash tree, the kingdom stretches farther than any before him. Still crude. Still fragile. But different. His last words are not recorded. Only that his eyes never closed, and that the hawks did not cry until the next morning. Years later, his name is spoken as a lineage. The house of Arged. The bloodline of kings. The fathers of the man who would one day cross the world. But that is still to come. For now, the wind returns to the burned village, where weeds have grown tall through the ash. A new boy walks among the stones. He does not know the story. He only knows the silence. And the feeling that something once lived here, something that refused to die. The wind moves like a whisper through the marble halls of Aigai, hissing under the lintels, teasing the edges of old war banners that hang stiff in the dusk. Somewhere beyond the mountains, wolves howl into the darkness, but here, in the royal palace, it is not wolves that stalk the corridors. It is waiting. A servant walks barefoot across the tiled floor, the sound of his steps drowned by the hush of power. Outside, olive trees twist in the cold, their branches skeletal in the late-season frost. Inside, time hangs like breath on glass. A boy stands alone beneath a painted colonnade, his shoulders squared in silence. His tunic clings to his back, damp with the sweat of training. A thin trail of dried blood curves from his knuckles. He hasn't cleaned it yet. He won't. His name is Philip. Not yet king. Not yet anything. But the shadow of the throne stretches across his face, and he does not blink. He has spent the day with the veterans, those old men whose joints crack like splintered shields, who still shout commands in the cadence of battles won and lost. He listens to them more than he does the scholars. He listens to how they curse. How they remember. How they never forgive. But today, he has been summoned early from the field. In the highest room of the palace, behind heavy doors carved with lions and stars, Amyntas III, his father, lies dying. No one speaks of it aloud. They dare not. But the rot is visible in his face now, in the blood he coughs into the cloth, in the way he can no longer hold the cup without trembling. The court still laughs over wine. Music still drifts through the megaron. But servants carry bowls more slowly. Noblewomen walk as if through a tomb. Macedonia is not yet an empire. It is a cracked vase, patched with favors, threats, and fragile alliances. It holds water only when no one stirs it. One slip, and it spills into chaos. Philip knows this. He feels it in his bones every time he steps onto the training field and finds his cousins watching. He sees it in the smiles of the nobles. Too wide. Too patient. And yet, he does not flinch. He was born in a land ringed with wolves, and he has learned to walk among them. By firelight, he watches his father sleep. The great Amyntas, slayer of Paeonian kings, conqueror of Thessalian gates, now hollowed by time and whatever sickness the healers cannot name. His chest rattles with each breath. And still, Philip waits. He does not cry. But he does remember. He remembers the first time his father took him into the hills, past the watchposts and out into the wild dark. They camped beneath the stars, no guard, no tent. Just the cold, the pine, and the hiss of wind through stone. If they want me, Amyntas had said, they'll come. But they'll find a lion. The fire cracked. A wolf called back from the trees. That was years ago. Before the betrayals. Before the court fractured like dried bone. Now, that lion sleeps. And every noble in the hall dreams of crowns. Philip leaves his father's chamber and walks the palace in silence. He passes the wall of shields, where the weapons of fallen ancestors are displayed in rust and pride. A hoplite spear, splintered at the shaft. A cuirass still dented from an Illyrian blow. A child's sword, never used, once meant for his older brother. He stops before it. For a moment, he lets his hand rest on the cool metal. He knows what they say, that he is not first in line. That his half-brothers have more noble blood, more allies, more polish. That he is too young, too quiet, too watchful. But Macedon does not need polish. It needs steel. Outside the palace walls, the world breathes fire. The Illyrians have taken the northern border again. Paeonia stirs. Thebes watches from the shadows. The Athenians send envoys wrapped in smiles and daggers. All of them waiting for the old king to die. Waiting for the boy to stumble. He will not. At dawn, he rides to the river alone. No guards. No fanfare. Just a stallion, half-tamed and blood-mouthed. The kind of animal that no groom will touch. He rides hard through the fog, letting the wind carve his face, letting the silence clear his thoughts. The river waits. Cold and indifferent. He dismounts. Washes his face. Watches the blood from his knuckles swirl into the current. Not yet, he whispers. Not yet. The next weeks pass like a noose tightening. His father fades. The court fills with soft-footed visitors. There are whispers of alliances, marriages, oaths sworn in secret. Philip watches. He learns. He learns that a man lies best when he smiles too much. That trust is a coin minted once and spent forever. That loyalty is a cloak worn until it rains. In the library, he reads of Sparta and its silent kings. In the training yard, he breaks his cousin's nose and is told to apologize. He does not. One night, he slips into the temple of Heracles alone. The fire is low. The priest has gone. He kneels before the altar. Not to pray, but to listen. The statues watch him, stone-eyed and hollow. What is strength, he asks, softly. Is it silence? Or the sword? There is no answer. Only the crackle of coals. The smell of incense and dust. But when he leaves, something in him feels different. Settled. Tempered. The boy returns to the court as if stepping into armor. He begins to speak. Not often. Not loud. But when he does, the room listens. He proposes new fortifications on the northern ridge. A grain tithe to buy the loyalty of the border clans. A marriage alliance not with the noble houses, but with the merchant families, the ones who actually fund the soldiers. The nobles laugh. At first. But the merchants do not. One by one, power begins to shift. His half-brothers frown. Then vanish. His cousins stop training with him. But the veterans, the ones with broken noses and scarred arms, they begin to nod when he passes. It is not coronation. It is not conquest. But it is a beginning. And still, his father lives. A husk, barely breathing, but alive. Perhaps that is the god's cruelest mercy, the slow unwinding of greatness, the soft unraveling of myth. Then, one evening, the nursemaid does not come to the hall. A servant appears in her place. Pale. Silent. Philip nods. He does not ask. He walks to the chamber alone. The body is already being prepared. Eyes closed. Mouth stuffed with myrrh. The lion is gone. He stands at the foot of the bed. I am not ready, he says, but not to anyone in the room. He lights the funeral torch with his own hands. The pyre burns for a day and a night. Smoke rises into the mountains, and the goats bleat in the hills. The next morning, Macedon has no king. But Philip does not kneel. He rides into the hills again, to the same place his father once brought him. He builds no fire. He sleeps with his back to the stone. The stars are cold above him. The wind moves through the grass. And somewhere in the dark, something watches. He closes his eyes. And does not flinch. Rain fell in whispers the day the king was burned. Not in torrents, not in thunder, just that soft, insistent mist that clings to the skin and settles in the bones, the kind of rain that makes the soul feel heavier. The skies over Aigai were gray, unfeeling. Above the hills, the funeral smoke hung in the air like a specter refusing to rise. The scent of resin and scorched pine drifted through the court's colonnades, clinging to cloaks, to beards, to breath. Macedonia wept with smoke, not tears. They laid the king on the pyre before dawn, his armor polished, his sword resting across his chest, the lion's standard folded beneath his feet. A few nobles stood in silence, wrapped in dark wool, their eyes heavy with calculation. The priests muttered their rites, not with reverence but routine. There were no cries. No drums. Only the crackling of wood and the soft hiss of the rain. The fire, starved of wind, burned low and bitter. Philip stood alone at the base of the hill. He did not kneel. He did not weep. This was not grief. This was reckoning. The man on the pyre was not just his brother. He was the last thread holding Macedonia together. And now, the thread had burned. Perdiccas III, son of Amintas, king of a half-kingdom, slain in battle against the Illyrians, a battle no one agreed to, no one planned for, no one survived. A reckless charge into northern hills, meant to restore pride. It brought only death. And with it, the collapse of whatever fragile unity had remained. Now there was no king. No council. No clear air. Only fire. And vultures circling. The court turned toward Philip, not with loyalty, but necessity. He had no claim. Only presence. His brothers were too young. His cousins too divided. And the northern border was bleeding. The Illyrians had moved fast. Already they occupied the passes. Already Paeonian raiders descended the rivers. Macedon was a house with its roof torn off, open to storm and flame. Philip did not ask for the throne. He did not need to. They came to him not with ceremony, but with silence. The old general Nicanor placed a spear at his feet. "We follow," he said. That was all. In a hall stripped of banners, before gods that had stopped listening, Philip accepted the weight. There was no coronation. No crown. Only duty and the shadow of fire. And a kingdom waiting to break. He began not with words, but with walking. He went to the barracks, to the fields, to the forges. He listened more than he spoke. He spoke less than he saw. In the training yard, he stripped off the king's cloak and sparred with his men until blood stained the sand. In the temple, he knelt with the priests, not in prayer, but in silence. He met with farmers, not to tax, but to ask, where was the grain going? Who stole it? Who enforced it? He summoned the mountain clans who had not pledged fealty in years. He let them insult him. Then he offered them grain, marriage, and iron. He visited the wounded from his brother's war. Sat beside a boy who had lost his jaw to an Illyrian axe. He fed him soup, spoon by spoon. When the boy choked, Philip did not look away. That night, he wept. Not from sorrow. From fury. The kingdom was rotting, not from outside, but within. He began to cut. Corrupt tax collectors disappeared. Border commanders were replaced. Mercenaries were brought in from Thessaly, not as soldiers, but as models. He studied their formations, their armor, their movement. He learned of the Theban phalanx. Of new ways to hold a line, to break cavalry. He called every blacksmith in the kingdom and ordered longer spears, 6 cubits. Then 8. Then more. They'll never hold, one general scoffed. Then train them to, Philip replied. The phalanx was born not from brilliance, but from desperation. He drilled peasants until they became soldiers. He taught them to move as one, not like warriors, but like a wall. He punished cowardice, but rewarded discipline. He built from the bones. But even as order returned, the knife hovered. The Illyrians had not retreated. They waited. Paeonia grew bold. Internal rivals plotted from behind golden cups. He responded as the old kings never could, with speed. One night, he rode north with only 20 men. No announcement. No banners. Just wind, frost, and silence. He visited a chieftain once allied with the crown. The man offered wine. Philip declined. He spoke of border patrols, of loyalty, of old debts. The man hesitated. Philip stood. Poured the wine into the fire. "You remember my brother," he said. "I remember the ones who stayed." The next day, 100 men rode south under Macedonian flags. He struck treaties with Paeonian tribes, offering not threats, but coin. Not fear, but certainty. Roads were cleared. Watchposts restored. The Illyrians prepared to strike again. Philip struck first. With a makeshift army of farmers and mercenaries, he stormed the northern ridge in winter, under sleet and howling wind. The battle was not grand. It was brutal. Men slipped in the mud. Screamed through frost-bitten lips. Shields shattered. Blood steamed in the snow. Philip fought at the front. His helmet cracked. His cheek split. But when the sun rose, the hill was his. He buried his dead. Fed the survivors. He did not boast. He did not feast. He walked among the wounded and memorized their names. Macedon was no longer bleeding. It was breathing. But Philip knew, victory does not mean peace. It means attention. And the world had begun to turn its gaze. To the south, the Greeks began to whisper. Thebes remembered the hostage boy they once kept. The boy who watched their drills, their teachers, their statesmen. The one they laughed at. The one who never laughed back. That boy had returned home. And was now building something terrifying. He had taken a kingdom of scattered tribes and turned it into a machine. Not yet perfect. Not yet vast. But relentless. In the palace stables, a young black colt screamed and kicked at its restraints. No rider could mount it. They said it was cursed. Untamable. Philip did not try. Instead, he watched a boy, slight, with sharp eyes and a strange calm, walk into the ring. The horse flared its nostrils. The boy whispered something in a tongue no one recognized. A dialect from the coast, or perhaps from older lands. The horse lowered its head. The boy climbed on. They said his name was Alexander. But that story comes later. For now, Philip stood at the gates of something vast and terrible. An empire not yet born. But stirring. He was no longer the boy in his brother's shadow. No longer the silent figure by the pyre. He was the architect. And somewhere beyond the hills, across the rivers, and over the sea, kings began to feel it, a tremor beneath the earth. A sound like iron sharpening against iron. A kingdom waking from sleep, the torchlight flickered across stone walls damp with history, and somewhere in the halls of Pella, a boy stood still, staring at a pool of blood. Not from battle. Not from sport. But from a lesson. The blood belonged to a sparring partner, older, stronger, foolish. He had mocked the boy's stance, his silence, his stillness. And now he knelt, coughing red into his hand, his ribs broken beneath the flat of a wooden blade. The boy had not smiled. Had not gloated. He simply turned and walked away. They said the son of Philip did not laugh. That even in youth, his eyes held the weight of storms not yet named. He was born the day a temple burned, a fire from a lightning strike, some whispered, or the wrath of gods disturbed by prophecy. His mother claimed dreams of thunder and serpents. His father rode to war and returned with silence. And in that silence, a shadow grew. Alexander. Not yet great. Not yet king. Only a boy, but never quite a child. He learned fast. Spoke little. Watched too much. At night, while others slept in feathered comfort, he read by oil light. He did not read stories. He consumed them. Homer. Herodotus. The myths of Troy. But he did not weep for Hector. He studied him. He did not marvel at Achilles. He searched for the cracks in his pride. Once, he stood in the garden beside his mother. She plucked laurel leaves and spoke of omens. He asked if the gods could be defied. She smiled. Only if you believe they bleed. From her, he learned fire. From his father, stone. Philip trained him not with gentleness, but with iron. The boy marched in rain, ate stale barley, slept beside wounded men. He watched horses die, cities burn, envoys lie through perfect teeth. And yet, he remained quiet. Until the day they brought him the horse. A black stallion, wild-eyed and foam-mouthed, striking fear into grown men. No one could tame it. Philip watched with grim amusement as his soldiers tried, failed, cursed. Then the boy stepped forward. He said nothing. Just observed. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, he walked to the animal's side and turned its head, away from its own shadow. He whispered something, and the beast stilled. He mounted. The courtyard held its breath. And the boy rode. Not with brute strength, but with understanding. When he dismounted, his father's voice cracked with rare pride. "Macedonia is not large enough for you," Philip said. The words hung in the air like prophecy. But Alexander did not bask in them. He only nodded. The boy was a shadow born of two storms, Olympias, with her visions and fury, and Philip, with his cold, iron-willed ambition. And between them, the boy found no peace, only drive. His tutors fed him knowledge. The best among them was Aristotle, summoned from far lands to shape the prince's mind. He taught him logic, medicine, the stars. But even he admitted, the boy learned as if remembering. "Teach me how the Persians speak," Alexander once asked. "Teach me what they fear." Not because he wished to befriend them. Because one day, he would face them. He walked through Pella not like a prince, but like a blade, sharp, dangerous, too quiet. He asked the guards why they posted their spears at such angles. He questioned the blacksmith on how iron bends before it breaks. He memorized maps not as pictures, but as futures. When a servant once spilled wine on his scrolls, the boy did not strike him. He simply asked, "What empire do you dream of conquering?" The man stammered. "None." "Then clean it again," Alexander said, "as if it matters." By 17, he led cavalry. By 18, he broke rebellions. And yet, he remained in his father's shadow. Philip, the builder of armies, binder of tribes, master of tactics. His walls rose. His enemies fell. His name echoed across the Aegean. He laughed louder than thunder. He ruled with eyes that missed nothing. But suns do not worship forever. And fires grow restless in tight cages. At a banquet, a noble mocked Alexander's mother, called her foreign, unclean. The boy stood, threw his cup, and shouted. The room silenced. Philip, drunk and furious, reached for his sword, stumbled, fell. Alexander did not help him up. Instead, he said, "He means to cross into Asia, and cannot even cross a room." He stormed out. Left the court. Rode into exile for weeks. When he returned, nothing was the same. He knew then, the bond between father and son was war-painted, cracked, strained by pride and prophecy. Philip would always be the king who carved the way. Alexander, the one who would walk it farther. But fate moves faster than fathers. On the morning of Philip's wedding to his new bride, a union meant to cement power, to produce purer heirs, the hall rang with joy, wine, horns. And then, a dagger. In one motion, like lightning from an unseen cloud, a bodyguard struck. Philip fell. No warning. No scream. Just the thud of flesh meeting marble. And blood spreading like a shadow. Panic erupted. Blades drawn. Doors sealed. The assassin was cut down. But the wound had already been carved, not in flesh, but in the future. The great builder was gone. And suddenly, the boy was alone. Not in grief. But in purpose. He did not cry at his father's bier. He did not tremble before the throne. He stood before the body, then turned to the court. His voice was calm. Cold. "I am the son of Philip," he said. "And I am the heir." Some nodded. Others hesitated. They would not live long. That night, he ordered the execution of rivals, whispers, threats. Cousins vanished. Rebels were crucified. The court was purged in silence. By dawn, the throne was clean. And the boy who had tamed a stallion, now held the reins of an empire. But he did not rest. He wore the crown not as ornament, but as iron. He rode north to crush revolt. South to demand fealty. East to offer mercy, then ruin to those who refused it. He slaughtered Theban rebels, razed their city, and left a single house standing, the poet Pindar's, as a symbol. Mercy, to him, was never weakness. It was a message. He did not rule with inheritance. He ruled with intent. And still, the shadow of Asia loomed. Persia. The empire of gold and silence. The land of kings who called themselves gods. It called to him not as conquest, but as destiny. He walked along the banks of the Hellespont and stared east. Once, Troy burned there. Once, Achilles died there. Now, he would ride there. And beyond. He took a handful of water and poured it into the sea. Accept my offering, he whispered. Not to the gods. To the future. Behind him, soldiers gathered. Tens of thousands. Phalanxes sharpened. Ships loaded. But before he crossed, he visited his father's tomb. No priests. No fanfare. Just him. He knelt. Placed a single coin on the stone. You built the ladder, he said. I'll climb it. Then he rose. And did not look back. The winds over Asia Minor were dry that spring, like a curse in waiting. Not a cloud in the sky. Not a bird in the air. Only the steady march of men, and the silence between their footsteps. Dust clung to their ankles. Salt crusted their lips. They marched not behind a king, but behind something stranger, a dream wrapped in flesh. Alexander. He was 22. Barely a man. Already a storm. The men whispered that he did not sleep. That he walked alone by moonlight, speaking to stars. That he carried Achilles' dagger beneath his cloak, and had Troy's sand hidden in his boot. And perhaps, in that heat, under that merciless sun, they believed it. Because belief was all they had. The great Macedonian war machine had crossed into Asia with steel in hand and ghosts at their heels. 30,000 infantry, 5,000 horse, and behind them, an ocean of debts, prayers, and widows. Ahead of them, the world's greatest empire. Persia. No land had ever consumed more cities. No king had ever sat so far above blood and fire. From Babylon to Susa, from the Zagros mountains to the edge of India, the great king's banners flew, silent, golden, eternal. And Alexander had come to tear them down. But conquest begins not with glory, but with waiting. Weeks passed. The men grew restless. Supplies thinned. They marched through lands not yet hostile, but not yet welcoming. Cities offered bread with one hand and spies with the other. Farmers disappeared at night. Wells were found poisoned. Trees were stripped bare. It was a drought of the soul. Some began to whisper, perhaps Philip was the real fire. Perhaps the sun was only smoke. At night, men sharpened blades not from need, but from fear. Of the land. Of the future. Of each other. Then came the scouts. Breathless. Mud-soaked. Eyes wide with something ancient. They had seen it. The Persians had arrived. Not a full army. Just the edge of one. 20,000 men, gathered near the Granicus River. Satraps. Horsemen. Immortals. Bronze and silk glinting in the morning haze. Waiting. A test. Would the Macedonian boy turn back? Would the dream bleed at the first prick? Alexander did not pause. He did not wait for his generals to counsel caution. He did not sleep on it. He ordered the men to prepare. Not for battle, but for a crossing. At dusk, as the river foamed like a mouth ready to bite, he called his commanders. The air was thick with silence. Water glistened like mercury under the fading sun. Tomorrow, he said, we cross. Some protested. The banks were steep. The current fast. The enemy waited above, with archers poised and cavalry readied. But Alexander smiled. Then let them watch. At dawn, the sky cracked open in red. The phalanx moved first, slow, deliberate, shields up, spears forward, into the water. The river pushed against their legs like a beast resisting fate. Behind them came the cavalry. Alexander rode at the front. Not behind. Not protected. At the front. Across the river, Persian nobles laughed. This was suicide, they thought. An insult to strategy. A child's rage masquerading as bravery. But then, it began. Not a charge. Not yet. A surge. Like thunder in slow motion, the Macedonian line crept forward, breastplates gleaming, helmets catching dawnlight like fireflies in war paint. The Persians struck first. Arrows rained. Horses screamed. The river churned red. And still, they came. Alexander broke through the center like a sword through parchment. He rode directly at the satraps. At the nobles. At the golden. And there, amid the chaos, his spear found flesh. One lord fell. Then another. And the laughter stopped. Blood in the river. Steel in the belly of Persia. By midday, the banks were slick with bodies. Persian horsemen fled. Those who did not drowned. The Granicus flowed slower now, choked with iron and entrails. Alexander dismounted. Walked to the edge. Let the blood-stained water touch his boots. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply stared across the east. One victory. But 1,000 more battles waited beyond the haze. That night, the men feasted. Drums beat. Songs were sung. But the king, he sat alone. Staring into the flames. And something in him had shifted. The boy who had once studied Achilles now bled like him. And tasted power like wine, heady, burning, dangerous. He ordered the burial of the enemy. No mass pit. No fire. A proper burial. They fought bravely, he said. They deserve peace. His men nodded. But in their eyes, unease. Mercy had not been Philip's way. But Alexander was not Philip. He was something else. He began to write letters, dozens, to Athens, to Sparta, to distant cousins and trembling satraps. Not to boast. To warn. I am coming. He left the wounded behind, but not abandoned. He sent them home, with honors. He knew morale was not a luxury. It was a weapon. And then, with the Granicus behind them, the army moved east. They did not know what lay ahead. But they knew the rhythm now. Fear. March. Battle. Fire. And Alexander, always just ahead. Some nights, he rode alone. They said they saw him speaking into the dark. To the gods. To the stars. To no one. A man with too many ghosts for silence. In the valleys ahead, Persian messengers galloped toward Darius III, the king of kings, bearing news that would rattle the very silk of Susa. The Macedonians had crossed. The dream was real. And the drought was over. It began with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that stretches before a storm, still, sharp, brittle as a blade's edge. Tyre. An island fortress that refused to bow. While city after city had fallen like leaves in Alexander's wind, some with honor, others with fire, Tyre stood unmoved, unbroken. It did not scream, nor plead, nor tremble. It simply said, no. And that word, small as a breath, stubborn as stone, echoed across the sea like a challenge. No. It was not a large city. Nor the richest. But it was holy. It was the temple of Melkart, the Phoenician Heracles, a god Alexander believed mirrored his own patron. He wished only to offer a sacrifice within its walls. A symbolic gesture. A flame of unity. But Tyre, proud, ancient, tied to Persia by blood and coin, denied him entry. They sent messengers with polite words but iron in their meaning. You may sacrifice on the mainland, they said. But not on our island. Not on sacred ground. Not while you bring war in your wake. And Alexander, who had crossed mountains and rivers, who had bled kings and broken armies, found himself halted, not by a wall, not by a sword, but by a city that would not kneel. He could have moved on. Many urged him to. Let the island rot, they said. It is a delay. A trap. But Alexander saw deeper. He saw what the world would say, if the great conqueror let one city defy him. He saw what the gods might whisper, if he did not offer his fire to Melkart. And he saw in Tyre, a mirror. Unbending. Glorious. Dangerous. So he did not move on. He stayed. And he did the impossible. He ordered the sea to become land. The island sat half a mile from the shore, protected by waves, wind, and faith. But Alexander would breach it, not with ships, but with stone. A causeway. A road across water. He called for rubble from ancient cities nearby. Temples were stripped. Hills were leveled. Trees were felled and lashed together as foundations. The men dug, heaved, dragged, waist-deep in brine and rot, as Tyrian archers rained arrows from afar. Days turned to weeks. Progress was slow. The sea resisted. And then the Tyrians struck. With fire. They launched ships soaked in pitch, floating torches hurled against the growing causeway. Flames swallowed wood. Men screamed. Stone sank beneath smoke. The sea laughed. Alexander did not. He ordered siege towers built on the shore. He reinforced the mole with stone and sand. And when the causeway rose again, stronger, thicker, he began to construct a fleet, ships from Sidon, from Byblos, from conquered harbors and trembling allies. The island would not be safe forever. The gods of Tyre watched. So did Melkart. And perhaps, so did something darker. Because Tyre would not fall easily. For months, the siege dragged on. Disease bloomed in the camps. Men collapsed in heat. Supplies dwindled. Morale frayed like a rotting sail. But Alexander did not bend. He walked the mole each night alone, as if measuring the stars for weakness. He spoke little. Ate less. Slept with sword in reach. And as the days lengthened, so did his fury. Finally, 7 months into the siege, the tide turned. The fleet was ready. Over 200 ships, armored and armed, encircled the island like wolves in formation. Alexander ordered the final assault. His siege towers moved along the causeway, closer than ever before. The ships battered the walls with iron rams. Grapnels flew. Flames rose. And in the heart of it, amid the chaos and salt and screaming, Alexander stood atop the first breached tower. He leapt into the fray with his bodyguard. Steel met flesh. Blood hit stone. The Tyrians fought like lions, citizens, soldiers, priests, hand to hand, in the alleys, on the temple steps, even on rooftops. But by sunset, the city burned. The holy temple was not spared. Neither were the stubborn. 8,000 died by sword. 2,000 were crucified along the shore. Alexander entered the temple of Melkart alone. His offering was not incense. It was silence. A moment, still and terrible, as smoke curled around the altar, the scent of ash and blood mingling with ancient oil. Then, without a word, he turned. The sea behind him was calm now. But something had changed. The world had seen what happened when defiance met obsession. He had not conquered Tyre. He had consumed it. And perhaps, it had consumed something in him. The causeway remained, stone across sea, a scar carved by will. And as the soldiers prepared to move east again, toward Egypt, toward the oracle, toward Darius, none spoke of Tyre. Some victories are too heavy to name. But Alexander remembered. He stood once more at the edge of the water. Alone. Cloak torn. Eyes rimmed with smoke and thought. And as the waves lapped at the ruins, he whispered, not to gods, not to men, but to the wind itself, this is the price. Then he turned, and walked toward the desert. Toward the next city that waited. The next prayer. The next silence. The desert does not speak. It listens. Not with ears, but with silence, that wide, endless hush that can crush a man's thoughts under its weight. Alexander entered that silence. Not as a king. Not as a warrior. But as a seeker. Behind him lay Tyre, crucified in smoke and broken coral. Ahead stretched the breathless sands of Egypt, pale, shimmering, ancient beyond memory. The sun was not a friend here. It scalded from above like a god displeased. The wind carried no relief, only dust and whispers. He had conquered cities. Now, he sought a name. The name. Not given by men, nor history, but by the gods themselves. The oracle of Siwa. Buried deep in the western desert, beyond even the Nile's reach, lay the temple of Ammon, where legend said the god spoke only in riddles, and only to those who were meant to hear. He did not take his full army. Only a few companions, trusted and tested, those who would not break beneath the desert's gaze. They rode in silence. Each hoofbeat sent up little ghosts of sand. The dunes shifted like sleeping beasts. There were no stars, only sun, sun from above, from the side, from the ground itself. Reflected, mirrored, magnified. Water became illusion. Mirages danced like temptresses, lakes that dissolved into dust, palms that vanished into heat. Men grew quiet. Faces cracked. Lips bled. Eyes blurred. And still, Alexander pressed on, eyes fixed on some invisible horizon, as if summoned by something older than logic. The guides whispered of omens. Of snakes that vanished beneath their feet. Of birds that circled once, then vanished. Of a wind that blew behind them for 4 days, never against. They reached an oasis. An impossible jewel, green palms, cool water, reeds that sang in the breeze. A silence not of death, but of presence. And there, rising from white stone, half devoured by time, stood the temple. Columns bent but not broken. Carvings worn smooth by sand. The air smelled of myrrh and something older, not rot, not dust, but memory. The priests greeted him with bowed heads and unreadable eyes. They led him inside. Alone. Only he could hear the god's breath. Only he would emerge with the truth. The chamber was dark, cool as bone, quiet as the hour before dreams. A single flame flickered. And in its light, Alexander knelt. Not as a king. Not as a conqueror. But as a child, kneeling before the unknowable. The words spoken inside were never recorded. Not by his scribes, nor his generals, nor even Ptolemy, who would one day rule Egypt in his name. What the god said, remained between them. Some claimed the priests called him, son of Ammon. Others swore he came out pale and trembling, lips moving in prayer. Still others believed he emerged, smiling. But one thing was certain, when he stepped into the light again, sand clinging to his boots, shadow clinging to his eyes, something in him had changed. He walked with the stillness of a man who had seen past the veil. Not pride. Not madness. But a calm too deep for mortals. From that day, he no longer pursued glory. He pursued fate. He wrote to his mother, Olympias, who had always whispered that Zeus was his true father, and told her she had not lied. The gods had spoken. And now, the world must listen. But fate is a fickle master. It grants no gifts without a price. And already, in the corners of his army, questions festered. What did he hear? Why would he not say? Was it blasphemy, or truth? Some feared he now believed himself divine. Others feared he might be right. The army moved east again, past Memphis, past Thebes, past the cities that bowed before him. Alexander no longer saw them as prizes. They were steps. Each a rung on a ladder only he could see. And in the quiet of night, he would walk alone, eyes turned to the stars. Sometimes he would whisper, not to his men, not to his gods, but to the sky itself, tell me, was it true? But the sky, like the desert, does not speak. It only listens. Still, something had been placed in his heart, a question, a fire, a wound. The boy king of Macedon had walked into the desert seeking a name. He emerged a legend. And legends do not rest. They burn. The next conquest lay to the east, the empire of Darius, still vast, still breathing. But Alexander no longer marched to crush a king. He marched to claim a world that had already been promised. Not by prophecy, but by right. The right whispered to him by the oracle's breath. He turned his eyes to Persia, not with hatred, but with hunger. And the shadow of Siwa followed behind him like a second cloak, woven from silence and belief. Ahead, the great river Tigris. And beyond it, the last gate. Where kings would fall. And immortality would open its hand.